do for the child rather than teach the child to do, right? And that's one of the largest elements within the curricula that we developed is how do we train parents to be the coach of their child? Because if you think about it down the road, a parent that's very helpful during homework time isn't the one that sits on their child and kind of does it with them in parallel. It's the parent that kind of takes a step back and says, what do the instructions say? Do you understand what the instructions mean? And guides them in that way. So teaching parents to be coaches is one of the best ways that we can train parents for that role as they go down. The beauty of that role too is that they don't have to always understand. We often hear that, right? Parents say, I don't understand math, how math is taught these days. If you teach the child to kind of guide themselves through the process and reinforce it, you might have more success, and it helps parents to have a heightened role there. And of course, for my early childhood folks, we always talk with families about the zone of proximal development, right? It's the proper amount of help that kind of gives that push. And what we tend to see is these two gaps, right? The family that helps too little or the family that helps too much. And so it's teaching the balance between these things. One of the things that we do, similar to what's done here, is we do a camp for the kids that weren't in preschool before the kindergarten year, and so kind of a little boost to get them used to the academic setting before school begins. And we have this club as a parent-child club, which the parents when they hear about the summer camp, right, they're like, sign my kid up. I'm like, but you have to come too. Right? But we do this for a good reason, because we want this to be really beneficial, and if we affect the child, that has some merit. If we affect the family, it has a great merit for generations, right? But one of the activities that we do, kids get a scissors, and it always astonishes me the number of kids who had never held the scissors by 4 and 5, right? Parents call them the shears of death, I believe, right? And these scissors now are like 2 pieces of plastic held together by, and it's like, I don't even know how it cuts anything. But astonishing in this moment is the number of times that parents say through these activities, I didn't know my child could do this or do that. And it's really reassuring to this child who's kind of like, oh, my parents recognizing what I'm capable of, and it's a really good moment. Now, I mentioned that I have my own daughter is entering kindergarten this year. It got real. This got real, right? But anyone who has been a parent, like we know all the studies now on screen time, and we know screen time being time in front of a computer, time in front of the TV. And how many know the recommendation for screen time for a child under 2? 0, right? 0. And then beyond that, it kind of grows. But as a parent who, my wife works opposite schedules with me, so she works evenings, I work days, so that we can both be home quite a bit with the children. There's this little thing called life that gets in the way sometimes of that. And there might be a moment when you are trying to make dinner or you're trying to do other things, and the research says, have the child make dinner with you every night. It doesn't always work that way, right? Let's be real. So we try to do the best of what we can do. And sometimes that's putting on these channels called Sprout, and different learning. And I'll say this, so we have, it has Sprout on, and they're showing, anyone seen this My Baby Can Read? It's an instructional program that's supposed to teach really almost end of infancy into early toddlerhood reading skills from like 18 months on, right? And so I'm walking by, like, there's an 18-month-old, it's a cat with a flip dog. And I'm like, I look over at my son at this point, who's got like a booger hanging out of his nose and drooling. And I'm like, oh, I'm missing something, And what I love about our office is there's a range of kind of different folks with expertise. I said, I've learned a lot in the last 8 years. I've learned a lot about one thing. So I know a lot about very little. And in my office, there's a lot of people who know very little, but they know different littles than I know, right? And so I was going around to one of our expertise in early literacy, and I said, does this work? And she said, not exactly, not exactly. So we're going to test in a 1-minute demonstration, My Baby Can Read. You guys ready for it? So it looks like everyone has a sheet of paper in front of them. It's going to be simple, it's going to be very simple. A piece of paper and a pen. I put this word up for you to write. Go ahead and write that word. Did everyone have a chance to get it? Okay. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to turn that sheet over so you can't see it. Okay. Because if we think about it, when you're learning letters, it's arbitrary characters that represent something, right? So let's go ahead. Without looking, I'll tell you that you just wrote the word spot. Now I want you to write top. And some of you will be able to do this. Some of you have a certain type of brain something that actually can do this. But go ahead and give it a try. Our good friends at Duke University are offering honorary PhDs for those that get this. Doctor, pleasure. Okay, let's see. Are we ready for the unveil? Show of hands, we got a couple. I want you all during the break, text your mom or message someone. Reintroduce yourselves as doctor. They're good for today only. But enjoy that, okay? Enjoy that. Why I put that up as an example is how we think children learn has changed over time. And the way in which a generation removed, and especially 2 generations previous, because a lot of grandparents are raising kids these days, right? Or raising their grandchildren, is copying used to be one of the means in which we taught reading or writing, right? And so word was put up and you copy, right? Similar with this Baby Read program, right? When they tested it, when you put CATs, C-A-T, the child had learned that those characters together were cat. They didn't learn phonetics in this, right? So when they reversed it and put T-A-C, which, we kind of a made-up word in this moment, no ability to read it. No ability. So they were learning memorization of characters in a row to represent something, which isn't bad. Were those children probably going to outpace other persons who weren't exposed to this? Yes. But to say that they were learning to read was a little bit of overstatement. So we have a little bit, we're going to go into the transition piece. This might not be a perfect cut when we go to break, but we'll just kind of pick up as we go through this morning presentation, as if there's an afternoon presentation. You guys are all staying here till like 3 o'clock, right? Right? Okay, so transition, what it is and why it's so important. And this is information that to me is always, every time it kind of stirs me, because this is one of mine. When I originally got the grants to work with the Improving Third Grade Reading, we were going to simply go out in the community, find more kids that were in preschool, and do stuff with them to get them more ready, right? And along the way, and doing the thorough literature reviews that we were doing to see what was going to be the most effective, it kept guiding us to this moment in time called transition, right? And so oftentimes transition had been seen or is seen as that one-time event or activity that's done before a child goes to school. So we have transition day, or we have transition moment. And really and truly, what the research has told us is it's kind of this ongoing process that's kind of when a child is 4 all the way through the kindergarten year until they're 6. And if we were really to look at it, kindergarten transition begins at conception. If we were to really think of it from that perspective, is all the thing that's going to increase that child's likelihood to succeed is going to occur before birth and beyond. But it's really hard, funders. It's really hard to get programming to cover that amount of time. So we break it down into a chunk that we can really have some gains in the short run there. So what is it and why does it work? And actually, a lot of this work that we've done and reviewed on transition comes out of this area, right? A lot of the national literature on transition, on school readiness, on all those elements really comes from Duke, North Carolina, and then up to Virginia. This has been the hotbed, and North Carolina should be applauded over and above for what your commitment has been in early childhood, because you really do set a pace for the nation, and we thank you for that. And you tested stuff out that we carry with us, so thank you. When I look at what was and this again, this is a Pianta piece that came out, but what was the kind of the traditional view of early childhood, right? And a transition. So there's a child in preschool. This arrow represents the magic. We'll talk about what the magic is. and then they're a kindergarten kiddo. 2 secrets about what the magic is. Do you guys know the 2 magic things that make someone eligible for kindergarten? They have a birthday. And there's one other thing typically. They get a shot. The magic is a birthday and a shot. And it's amazing because I sat with parents many times when they were coming to kindergarten assessment, which they call testing. A lot of times parents call it testing. Because there was a time in which there was only so many kindergarten slots because it wasn't as well funded, right? And so this is the irony, right? So we tested kids, and the kids that did best got into kindergarten, and the kids that were most behind had to wait a year. Logic, right? But this, right? So I sit with parents who are very nervous, and it's amazing how seldom the teacher or the assessor, and this is not that teachers and assessors are bad people, I think they're so focused on the child, right? But they don't necessarily have a conversation with the parent that, you know what, the magic happened already. We're just looking to see how we can individualize things to make your child succeed the most, right? Because that's really what the assessments are meant to do, is to help us get a snapshot of where that child is at. So the magic happens and that child's in kindergarten. So with that model, that's why the typical types of things for transition have been the preschool class goes and does a tour of an elementary building, right? Does that happen perhaps here? Maybe that a kindergarten teacher goes to a preschool and kind of talks about what kindergarten's like. Common practice as well. But a lot of the common practices, as we kind of look at them, are centered around the preschool to kindergarten connection. It makes sense. How do we find the kids the easiest? We find pockets of where those kids are beforehand, right? Do you remember when I talked about the percents of kids that are preschool before they enter kindergarten? About half, right? Varies by community, varies largely by community, but the national average is about 50%. That's what we've seen in Pittsburgh, is about 50%. Who do you think needs transition the most? That group that we're missing, right? That group that we're missing. The beauty of it is they're somewhere, and they're involved in other things that we might not be thinking about. So there's ways to kind of capture them in pockets as well. But if we continue the practice of only targeting those families that might likely be the most prepared, we're going to continue to have the biggest gap that we can have at 3rd grade. So that's one of the elements that we have to look at. So when you think about it, children exist and they exist someplace, and they're in the community in different regards, and they're supportive teachers, peers, adults around these folks. Anyone ever go to a party or event and activity where they didn't know anyone? That's not nerve-wracking at all, right? Right? Would that event activity have been a little bit easier if you had at least knew one person going there? Right? One of the other practices that often takes place when they look at placing children in different classrooms is, well, those two were sat together during preschool. It'd be good for them to be in different classrooms, so they have to get to know other people. Have you heard this kind of things before, right? It'd be good for them. Because 5-year-olds are better than us at navigating social relationships. It'd be good for them. That's based off of the early phase of what we called hardening of children, that we thought children needed to suffer to grow. Hardening, yeah. It's amazing how some of these small practices are embedded for generations because we thought it made sense. And even though we have research now that says it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, we haven't always changed the practice, so we have to consider these things as we move forward. But embracing those supports that are around there. So if they're involved with a family support center or some type of center, let's talk with those professionals and include those professionals in the transition, because those children have been used to that support along the way. How does it continue on? Also, one of the elements that we see is that kids that were involved with some type of special support, whether that be reading support in that, they're reassessed months into the kindergarten year. We want to just see how this goes. We hear this, right? Because my own daughter, who was in speech, right, during her pre-K year, and enrolling in kindergarten, they said, well, let's just see if that holds up, and then we'll have her assessed a couple months in. I'm like, so my daughter, who's made gains for an entire year in her pronunciation of things, should then backfall to then come back forward. doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we need to think about those things as we transition kids in. So if we took, this is the Bible on transition. I'm going to blow this up in a moment, okay? But if we were to look at this, a couple things. First of all, why do kids struggle? Why do a lot of kids, and we'll talk about the number in a moment, why do so many kids struggle? It's for this very reason. It might be the first time in a formal education setting. It might be the first time that someone other than their parent was kind of the leader of that moment in that day that they had to be guided by. It's meeting new kids and navigating new environments. And all those things are why kids have some difficulty at the onset of kindergarten, right? And so those things are there. Now, if we were to take just a large body of research and boil it down to a couple key points, if transition occurred and occurred well, these would be the outcomes for kiddos, right? So they'd be more confident, more assured of themselves, more likely to kind of make good relationships with their peers. They'd be more open to the new experiences, and they'd achieve early success. Who's my pre-K folks? Would you want that for all the children that you're sending? Of course you would, right? For all my kindergarten people, would you want them to be the first encounters that they've had? Absolutely, right? Research also says that if we include parents in the process, there's outcomes for them, right? That they feel that they're kind of the navigator of their child's education. They feel more connected to the school. They feel like a sense of accomplishment that they kind of can guide their child through this role. And they are more likely to stay engaged in the child's education process. What the research says that a parent's involvement in school starts high and goes low, right? But if those first encounters are very positive and they see a role, they tend to stay engaged much longer, right? If you have a good first date, are you more likely to go on a second date? Of course, right? And so some of these basics are the same things that families experience when they engage with a school. The research also says if teachers are engaged in the process, and teachers are sometimes forgotten, right? Sometimes it's that some office or staff administrator kind of guides the transition practices, and the child never sees the teacher. But if they're engaged in the process, they feel more connected to the children as well. They feel more connected to the parents. And if kind of this transition practices also involves the community, they're more aware of the supports and the resources in the community, that if they notice something about a child, they're like, oh, I've heard about community mental health. Oh, I've heard about the food bank, and I've heard about these elements, that they might also serve a broader role to engage in the entire family. And then the kumbaya moment. Did you bring a good time? The research actually says the entire community benefits from good transition practices, all the way down to more students completing high school. And the other one up there is the healthier children, right? If you think of it, if a 5-year-old is anxious or nervous about something, what do they say? What ailment do they say? My stomach hurts, right? And we're going to talk more about this, but one of the problems that we have is that we don't value kindergarten the way we should. We don't understand it as well, we don't value it the way that we should. So when a 5-year-old says their tummy hurts, we don't dig a whole lot deeper, we say, okay, honey, you can stay home. Right? Oftentimes that's one of the answers, is that's okay, we can stay home. And the research says the number of missed days that are occurring because of things like this, which is actually anxiety or nervousness, versus true illness, is quite high. And we're going to talk later, a little bit later, about what missed days in kindergarten equates to down the road. So all these things together, we thought we were going to tackle, oh, that is really hard to read. The good thing is we're going to break this down more. That one shows up a little bit better, but we're going to talk more about this. This is just kind of the preface slide. That we thought, when we began this work, where it's about readiness, which then went to the elements of transition, which then went to, well, for them to take part in transition events and activities, they have to be enrolled so we know them, right? We'll talk about that. To, are they coming on the first day of school? Are they coming from the beginning, that they get the full dose of kindergarten? And that was an issue that we faced. To the last element, are we keeping parents engaged in the process, and do kids continue to come? And do they continue to come through that kindergarten year to get enough of the year? So let's break down a couple of these elements. I'm going to check my time. Okay. This is where I'm going to give a little bit of Pittsburgh local data, and we'll talk, and when we get to the kind of the planning, the next stage, we might determine some of these are also issues here, and some of these we have nailed, which is great. And if that's the answer that we have, well, we got that element nailed, that's helpful, right? We didn't have any of these nailed in Pittsburgh, right? So we had to do the full dose of making sure that all these elements were covered. Were kids enrolled on time and take part in events and activity? And if you look at June, we use kind of June 1st as the cutoff. That's when it's roughly around when school's closing, and a lot of our buildings are closed during the summer. So transition really was difficult to have happen in school buildings during the summer. So we always targeted June 1st as kind of a date to have the majority of our kids enrolled. If you look then, at that point in time, there's a large number that had, and this was about a third of the 34 elementary schools had less than 30% of the kids enrolled at that point in time. There was schools that had as low as 6% enrolled at that time. Wow. The district average was about half of the kids, and intervention schools where we had piloted the work that we're going to talk about were at about 65. That sounds a little okay, but if I said to you, those intervention schools had the highest amount of free reduced lunch and the highest amount of community challenges, that's something to be said there, right? That's something to be said when the most challenged schools outpace the district average. And Pittsburgh, and I work a lot with Buffalo, Pittsburgh compared to Buffalo has a less of a range. Buffalo, with the economic downfall that they have, tended to have a large band of mostly low income, where Pittsburgh has bands of both high and middle income within a community. So they were a little bit different there. So getting kids enrolled at the right time. This is one element of the national piece then. What percent of kids struggle with transition? It's actually almost half. Actually, almost half of kids struggle with the transition into school. How many of you have difficulty falling asleep? I'm one of those, right? I'm one of those that has that. How many of you could fall asleep anywhere? I saw 2 people already. That's okay. I get better. So right? And the interesting thing sometimes is for those that don't struggle with sleep, it's hard for them to get what it's like to struggle with sleep and what that all entails and the thought that goes into it, right? So about half of kids struggle. And for a large group of that 48%, it's those typical jitters that we would feel when we started a new job, right? Am I going to know anyone? Am I going to like it? Are they going to like me? Where do I put my food? Right? When I start a new job, is there a kitchen? Really important things, right? Where do I park? If you haven't had that conversation before, what do I wear? All those things that we kind of have rolling through us the night before. For some reason, we don't think 5-year-olds go through that same thing. They don't articulate it, right? But they go through the same process. So for a large number, that 48% of the kids, they're nervous about those first day things that we experience. Which, if we had transition, they would have seen the room, they would have seen their teacher, they would have seen all those things that greatly reduces that level of anxiety, and it's just a little bit less of a jitter than for that day. But there's also a group of kids within that 48% where, like I talked about, difficulty sleeping. There's folks that need to put a fan on or having some noise, to the folks that need medication, to the folks that need a lot of medication, right? There's a range of types with it. And so there is this pocket within that group of kids that struggle, that really struggle. And for them, and I'll give you an example that, I had one kiddo that was really struggling. And through kind of this activity that we did, which I'll talk more about later, comes to find out that his mom was a victim of domestic violence. And he was scared to leave his mom home alone, right? And so that type of getting that child comfortable with going to school was very different. But again, going back to small town roots, that child mattered, right? Every child mattered, and so that child had to have these practices that were going to make a difference. The last thing is transition practices. This is national again. The most common transition practices occur after school's begun. You ever go on a tour 2 weeks after you've been at a place? you figured it out, what you can by that point, right? So that's one of the challenges is timing. Well, the timing of these things is very important. And so, again, our view of transition, and it's the views that come out of the research here in North Carolina as well, is that transition is a series of activities that don't just tell you about this is the building, this is the stuff, but it fosters a relationship, right? And what's interesting about how we foster relationships within transition events and activities is the research also says it's small snippets of time. It doesn't mean that you have to have a half-hour sit down with the teacher. These oftentimes, the effect can be found by 1 minute, 2 minute interactions between a teacher and a child, which can occur quite easily in these events. Getting kids there on the first day. This is something we didn't realize was as huge a problem until we started to talk. And I know Ren has done some looking at the number of kids that start school late, right? And we have that issue in Pittsburgh, we've had it to a large degree. So we tracked for a year kids that were present on the first day of school versus kids that were not, right? And kids that were present on average missed 9 days. How many? That seems already like a high number, right? We think that already seems like a high number. But those kids that weren't present on the first day missed double the amount of days. That seems like a very high number. Where this carries forward, right? And it's not, and I'm not saying being there on the first day predicts the child doing well or not well, or attending or not attending. It's all the reasons why that child wasn't there on the first day that predicts them not, that they missed days, right? So let's carry this forward through the kindergarten year though. This is the new, some of the new literature on chronic absence. And from Lorna's conversation last night, it appears that here you track student daily average. It's taken us 7 years to get Pittsburgh to look at chronic absence, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference in a moment. But nationally, 1 in 10 kids misses about a month of school, right? And chronic absence is defined by missing 10% of the school year. A typically 180-day school year, so that means missing, 18. You guys remember that last slide I had up there? 18 days. If you look at low-income areas, it tends to be somewhere up to 1 in 4 kids missing this number of days. And then this is the big piece here. So what's it matter? What does it matter? Those kids that were chronically absent in kindergarten, only 17% read a grade level in 3rd grade. There's our gap. There's our gap right there, right? It worked out really well. Yesterday when we were getting off the airport, I'm like, when you give stats, we forget that these are people. And I always that's one thing that I want to make sure that we know. We have to be thinking of the kids, right? So Ren picked me up from the airport yesterday, and there just happened to be 100 kids standing there. It worked out perfect. After we got detained for a while, I got questioned why we rounded up 100 kids, but needless to say, we found 100 kids, and look at all those faces with promise. Those are those that would be reading a grade level of the 100 if they didn't attend. All those missed faces, right? All those missed opportunities. So to me, that's why really shining a light on kindergarten attendance is so important. And the research actually supports it. For a long time, it was said that prisons are based on 3rd grade reading scores, building of prisons, right? I did see that your tallest building in Durham, I didn't say that out loud, did I? No. But now, longitudinally, kindergarten attendance is seen as the strongest early predictor of high school dropout. We know it from kindergarten. If that is an example of how important kindergarten is, I don't know what could be, right? And so the difference between how we look at attendance versus how we maybe should look at attendance is student daily average is what's what's used, right? And it's used, and schools are, it's the one thing that they always get to check off because most schools make that for their AYP. But if you looked at schools across the country and schools that are just good practice and promising things are happening and good outcomes are occurring, they're going to have student daily average attendance rates of 90 to 95. If you go to schools that have challenges and have less performance, they're going to have student daily average of 90 to 95. If you go to low performance schools and look at student daily average, guess what, folks? It's likely going to be 90 to 95. It doesn't look that different. And it might be 85 to 95 depending on the region. But what it is you're kind of taking effect. How many of you were here today? 1, 2, not a great count, but a large number, right? And so if you were in my school, oftentimes what happens is it's on any given day, 90% of the people are there. On any given day. But what's important to look at is how many times you miss and how many times you miss. Because you are going to miss different days. So collectively, on any day, 90% are there. But some of you are missing so many days that your learning is in jeopardy. Right? And especially from the early grades on, when the building blocks of everything you're going to need to know down the road is occurring, and you miss it all during this first year, it's so critical. Now, my early childhood folks, this is why your investment is so important. So there's a lot of different tests for how ready a child is, but one of the ones that was found to be most effective was out of California. And so they assessed all those realms that we talked about earlier, the social, emotional, the cognitive, the parent engagement, to see and lump them into a ready or not ready for kindergarten 2 categories, right? And so then they looked at kindergarten attendance and then 3rd grade outcomes for both of those 2 groups. The group that would, so this is just the ready kids, just the ready kids. The kids that were ready and attended were high above proficiency. The kids that had been in preschool settings had come in ready and yet missed the kindergarten year a large number of days, dropped below proficiency by 3rd grade. So it's the you gotta use it or we lose it philosophy that we look at for the kindergarten year that's very, very important. That looks like doom and gloom for a moment. So why, and this is probably where we're going to kind of wrap up for a moment before we go into the break. So why do kids not come? Why do they come late? Why do they come unprepared? It's tied to a lot of different reasons, right? One of the strategies that we did to kind of get to know that other 50%, the 50% that weren't in preschool settings, was we went to them. We did door-to-door canvassing across Pittsburgh to have conversations with families about what was getting in the way. And so we learned a few things along the way. We learned that, first of all, they had bad last experiences with school. Right? So when the letterhead came with Pittsburgh Public Schools label on it, that aside, right? They were less likely to be responsible to school based on last experiences with school and whether they were bullied when they were in school or they dropped out or different elements, or that they had bad experiences with the older siblings. So they were, I'm going to wait as long as possible to put my child into this scenario. But globally, we learned that families, it wasn't that they devalued education. Families didn't always know just how important the year is. And we can't fault them that much when we look at a couple of these things. Kindergarten is so important. This is the kindergarten is so important phase, right? The kindergarten is so important in our country that 14 states require it. What does that tell people, right? One of the other elements we hear often is it's just kindergarten. And that comes from the generation removed, right? That it's just kindergarten that kindergarten was regarded as like play school, or kindergarten is just kind of the introduction, they don't do anything too serious. Yet, if you talk to kindergarten teachers, they say kindergarten is today what first grade used to be, right? And so there's the rigor, the vigor of these things, but there's a lack of knowledge. So that's one of the elements that we had to kind of tap into, is that there's a perception out there that kindergarten isn't as important as we think it is. One major study that was done by the Ad Council, and this was targeted to understand why kids are missing so many days early on, is families of all different incomes were surveyed, and this was done in LA and Chicago, to see how different families with different age children value education. And not surprisingly, parents thought high school was very important. Right? And they thought high school was very important because when you go to fill out a college application, do they ask for your elementary Grades? They don't. So it's not that surprising that high school is much more valued. And parents collectively thought of